All right, guys, we are going to wait just a few minutes so our attendees can jump on as we get ready to go live for this awesome panel discussion that we have prepared for you today. So as our attendees jump on, we appreciate you joining us today. Just give us a couple minutes so we can give everybody a chance to hop on the webinar here, and we look forward to having this discussion here in just a few minutes. We have everybody just look and smile, right? Look and smile, wave, hi. All right, guys, good afternoon, everyone. What is going on? We are so happy to have you join us here at the Addiction Prevention Coalition for a very important panel discussion about loving someone with substance use disorder, or we call that SUD or SUD. I'm Lauren Sisler. I'm your host and a contributor to this panel discussion, and I'm joined by Melanie Childers as well as Art and Carrie Wimberly, and we appreciate you guys jumping on and joining us today. And I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves because you both have, or all three of you have wonderful resumes and can speak to this topic very closely. And Melanie, I'll start with you with a little introduction about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Melanie Childers. I'm a licensed professional counselor at Lifeline Solutions. We actually have 2 locations in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham. And I have 5 years of experience working with SUD and families.
All right, thank you. And Carrie and Art Wimberly, an introduction from the both of you. Now the question is, who gets to go first? Because they're going to look at each other a lot and say, who's going to go first? That's the husband-wife duo, y'all. This is how we roll.
Yes, I'm going first. I'm Carrie Wimberly. I'm the Director of Operations at the Addiction Prevention Coalition. And so we're kind of here for a couple of different reasons. I'll let Art kind of just introduce himself, but from APC representative, but also as parents of, we've had two of our 5 children have struggled with substance use disorder, each of them for over a decade, and they are both sober now, which we're thrilled about, and they've given us permission to talk about that. We won't share specifics of their story, but for this topic, we're kind of weighing in here as parents.
Yeah, and I'm Art Wimberly, and Carrie's husband and the father of 2 of those boys, and also a person in long-term recovery myself. And Carrie and I have been involved in recovery from a family perspective for about 20 years. And much of that time we have helped fashion processes in communities, especially around support groups for families of addiction. So, hey.
And one of those support groups called Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, PAL. We're going to get into more about that and how you can get involved with that wonderful support group that we actually have coming up later tonight. It's Thursday, right?
Yeah.
We love Thursdays, and a great opportunity to connect and have a safe place to go and have discussions, and certainly share your feelings and things you might be experiencing as a parent or a loved one of someone who struggles with substance use disorder. So now the purpose of today's call, or I guess I should say webinar, is for us to have a conversation about how to navigate this difficult path of supporting someone with substance use disorder, and the importance of setting those boundaries, maintaining your own mental health throughout all this. And please note, there will be an anonymous Q&A available during the session. So we would love to take any questions that you may have. And there is a button underneath, if you go to type up your question, that you can click to make sure that your name is anonymous, because most of our attendees and everyone can see those questions. So if you have any questions, we would love to answer those throughout this webinar. We'll be here with you for the next hour, however long it takes to go ahead and cover all those topics of conversation. And again, we appreciate your participation so very much. And we really just want to spark a conversation here and provide some insight into navigating something that can be so extremely challenging. There is really no blueprint for how this thing works or a manual, but through education and I think all of our own personal experiences, Carrie, Art, obviously Melanie, you can all speak to that. I personally can speak to that, not quite having that understanding of how to do this thing. And so, just a little background about myself. I have, unfortunately experienced, addiction from a different level with both of my parents, who were struggling with the concealed battle with addiction for many years when they were still here, and unfortunately passed away when I was 18 years old and a freshman in college. just a few, hours apart from each other, both of them struggling with prescription drug addiction. And so, that kind of being on the other end of this and having that education and knowledge of how to deal with these things, and obviously to help others, has been really powerful and important for me. And so, I hope to jump into the conversation as well. But let's go ahead and get this started. We'll start with Melanie first and foremost. And Melanie, why is this topic so important for family and loved ones to explore in finding ways to cope?
It's crucial. Families of people who struggle with addiction need help just as much as the person with substance use disorder. So that includes therapy, that includes educational groups, support groups, practicing coping skills. That is vital if you want to maintain mental health. The further addiction progresses, all areas of life suffer, not just your mental health. So as soon as you can get tapped into resources, the better. And unfortunately, many families do wait until the disease of addiction has progressed quite a bit to tap into those resources. But if you can get in, if you can kind of hear some of the recommendations we have today and look locally, wherever you're from, for some of those resources, that will help immensely, for sure.
And Carrie and Art, from your standpoint as, Art, someone that has obviously, that is in recovery, but then now having to deal with that on the other end and seeing, somewhat of maybe a reflection of yourself and what you've gone through and battled with, to be on the other end of that. Why is it so important for you as a family to take care of these issues and to really help yourself mentally to be able to overcome this and not be so reliant on, obviously, the codependency aspects that come with loving those that are suffering with addiction?
I think for us, what became apparent fairly quickly when we were dealing with the addiction of first one son and then another layered on top of each other, as Melanie said, it didn't take long for us to see that every aspect of our being was being affected, our marriage, relationship. We had 2 other children in the home that were younger. We were trying to parent. We both had careers, a social life. Everything was starting to suffer. The tension, the weariness, the anger, and the fear combination was wearing us out. And so we were fortunate in that the advice we got early in that first year was we needed to get into a support group. We needed to have our own sponsor, if you will, for our own recovery as loved ones. And we might need therapy as well. So we began to take advantage of that. I won't say really early, but at least by the second year, we had layered some of those things in because frankly, we were desperate. And so we went to Al-Anon, 12-step groups. Carrie was getting a lot from that, probably earlier than I was. I was still caught up in the denial of my own addiction, honestly. And I think she was making some breakthroughs in 12-step and Al-Anon.
Yep. When we first went to that Al-Anon group near our home, my father was an alcoholic. So when I entered that room and started hearing those conversations going around, it hit me, pretty quickly and pretty hard that, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is not just about our children. This is about me. I've got some work that I've got to do in order to parent them in a more healthy way. But one of the things, and we talk about this a lot with parents, is the shame and the guilt factor. Both of those kept us locked down for a good while. The shame of not feeling like I could talk about this with other parents, and the guilt of thinking, okay, this is happening. They are struggling because we have failed as parents. We have not given them what they need to survive, and thrive in the world. We're actually responsible for this. So when you put those two together, that's such a deadly combination to keep you hidden, and to keep you from reaching out for help. That's what we're trying to, every parent we get in front of is, fight through that to find your group, to find your people so that you can start working through those things, because those things will absolutely cripple you.
Yeah, and I think that really answers the question of why it takes some people so long to really make that transition and maybe take that acceptance and say, I do need to go get help, because it is that shame and it's that stigma and that, not quite understanding it. And, I think you can all attest to this. It becomes a thing where it's not my kid, it's not my family. As someone that dealt with it with my parents, it wasn't until after they passed away that I was able to acknowledge that they had a problem with opiate drugs and that they had an addiction. And so I lived in that shame and that fear for 7 years and really couldn't tell people. So for me, it was in the aftermath that I spent 7 years not wanting to address the issues and obviously being so removed from it that it was actually suffocating me. And it was almost like I was becoming codependent on the notion that I was, going to hide this truth. And I was so adamant about people not knowing what had happened because I was so fearful of how my parents might be judged or how I would be judged, that I was almost living in this different world. And Art and Carrie, I imagine you can speak to this, and Melanie too, where in some ways it's easy as loved ones of those who are addicted to actually fabricate and sometimes embellish in what our reality truly is in an effort to protect ourselves and protect our families.
Definitely. I was going to say, definitely. I think another reason people take a while to get plugged into resources and to kind of even internally acknowledge the depth of what's going on is a lot of loved ones don't realize how much their own experiences actually mirror that of the person with the addiction issue. And I don't necessarily mean that you have an addiction to a substance, although research shows that that's where it can head quite easily. So what I mean is, if you can replace being addicted to a substance like drugs or alcohol with being addicted to worry, that's exactly what can help a family member in terms of what mindset you need to have. This is why it's important to get help. You can quickly become addicted to worry, to get it to go away, to do things that, try to make you feel like you're in control of a situation that is really uncontrollable.
So when you speak about being addicted to the worry, expound upon that a little bit more and what that truly means. Because again, I think that a lot of times those on the outside looking in, seeing an addict, we think that's not me, but then we almost get pulled into it. And we actually the worry becomes part of our everyday lives 24/7, that it's almost like we don't know anything else other than to become addicted to that worry.
So back when I worked at a treatment center, I ran IOP groups, and that stands for Intensive Outpatient Program. And one of my favorite things that we would do on Family Day each week, so that's when the families come in and participate in the group session with the patients, was this activity where we would look at the substance use criteria and we would compare it to the family experience. So like I said, replace the word substance with worry, and that is what families go through. So for example, if you try cutting back on your worry and you can't, how many of us have experienced that? You just can't flip it off like a switch. So a lot of time and mental energy is spent on worrying and try to get the worry to go away.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I don't think we were aware of that dynamic in that first year or two of dealing with a substance use disorder for one and then the second son. Definitely we were worried, fearful, angry, all those different things were going on. I don't think we had a clue how much energy and time we were spending with worry and how it was sapping our life for everything else.
And we certainly see that when, in the parent group that we help facilitate, especially when new parents come in. Basically, when you start talking about the concepts of treating our, children that are dealing with substance use disorder as an adult, not as a child. And so letting them make their decisions, letting them suffer their consequences, etc. And you start watching the visceral response when we start thinking about, okay, but that would mean that I'm not going to follow up on them. I'm not going to check behind them. I'm not going to make sure they're doing everything they're supposed to. I'm not going to bail them out of jail. I'm not going to pay their fines. And that means they're going to, you see a physical response to that. And that's where I was. I mean, I was, you know, keeping up with every little thing, trying to protect them from themselves. And my mind was constantly racing around, okay, what could I do next? What incentive can I put in front of them that will give them a reason to stop? What consequence can I lay out there that would make them stop? I was in that cycle, you know, and to lay that cycle down means I start to feel the pain that I'm trying not to feel with what's going on.
Right, right. And, you know, to go back to the criteria, so we all know that people with addiction, what they struggle with, and part of what constitutes a substance use disorder are cravings and withdrawals. So mirror that to a family experience. Families experience cravings or urges, we'll say, to engage in behaviors that help mitigate the worry. Makes sense, right? So you experience an intense amount of worry. You start to think, oh, well, I need to go through their phone and make sure that they're not, you know, texting their old dealer. I need to check their location, make sure they're where they say they are. I need 1,000 questions because even though they already answered me, it's not enough. A lot of families talk about those experiences. So you engage these behaviors, and the problem that happens is it creates this feedback loop. So you start to worry intensely, then you engage in these behaviors, and they do ease the worry amount of time. But now your brain knows, okay, if I get really worried, I do these behaviors and I'll get relief from the worry. So then it's conditioned. But what happens is the urges or the cravings become more intensified over time, and they can actually happen more often if you continuously give in to those urges to act on those things. And Carrie, those are really good examples that you gave.
Yeah.
It's, as you mentioned earlier, it's the illusion of control.
Yep.
I actually feel like I've got some control when I don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And I think it just becomes that vicious cycle. I know I dropped off there for a minute in the conversation, lovely Wi-Fi. But you know, I do think that you kind of get caught up in that, and then that becomes your new normal of that constant worry and trying to figure out, you know, I think even at times I still have constant worry of that separation anxiety of, you know, my parents aren't here, this is how I lost them. And now it's that constant worry, you know, when I hear, you know, an ambulance or something, you know, an emergency happening, my brain immediately goes to that phone call that I got that night that my parents passed away, and immediately reflects on, oh my gosh, is my family okay? Is my fiance okay? Is, you know, is this person okay? Because I start to get worried. And you know, sometimes it's really hard to make that separation and to be able to do that. And that kind of leads into the codependency aspect of it. And I think one thing that's interesting is many behaviors that we have as loved ones to those with substance use disorder tend to have some of the same consequences. And I think the codependency really speaks to that and how we're all kind of wrapped in this thing. And Melanie, you can start, you know, describing what codependency is, and ways to sort of, you know, distance yourself from that and eliminate codependency.
Right. Codependency is such a loaded topic. It's definitely one that comes up. And really, I don't know if anyone who's listening or if any of you guys have read a book called Codependent No More by Melanie Beatty. It is probably the Bible for codependency in the addiction world. And even in her, you know, first couple of chapters, she talks about how there's not really an agreed upon definition for codependency. So it's just a really intensive topic, but for the purposes of what we're doing today, you can think of it as a state of mind that you have towards your loved ones. And it's this idea that when you feel better, I feel better. When you feel worse, I feel worse. Mm-hmm. It's reactionary, and it's based upon what another person is doing or feeling. Like I said earlier, when you start to feel those things from the person, especially the person with addiction, you start to experience the consequences that they're facing, because the families will get looped into that. Will start to try to control the situation around you, and that's where a lot of codependent behaviors can be displayed. And boundaries are very important to prevent not only the situation from continuing the way it is with everyone around you, but boundaries internally are also helpful so that you can maintain your own mental health. Codependency is most harmful to the person who is displaying codependent behaviors. And one thing that I try to remind my clients about a lot, because I'll have clients come in and say, oh, well, I'm doing codependent things and I never knew it. I thought I was just being a caretaker. I thought I was taking care of everyone. So I'm bad if I'm codependent. And that is not necessarily the truth. In fact, a lot of codependent behaviors come from a place of good intentions, I'll say. But like I said earlier, they are very helpful, especially if you have no boundaries within the situation.
And Art and Carrie, maybe you can speak to that and some of the codependent behaviors you started to recognize within yourselves as you were dealing with this with both of your children.
Yeah, I think specifically for me, mine was kind of subtle, but it took me a while to pick up on it. But my tendency is to believe the best about a person or a situation, a little bit of a naivety there and an optimistic outlook. Nothing wrong with that. But my tendency was to believe when I heard one of my sons say something that, oh, I hoped it was true so much that I made it be true, which then enabled me to not make the decisions I needed to do or keep the boundaries that I had set. And my first brush with boundaries was so immature because I naively thought if I set a boundary, the other person's going to suffer. What I had to learn was I love the way Melanie described it, the internal boundary. I had to start setting the internal boundaries that said, if I'm willing to set a healthy boundary with my loved one and myself, I'm probably going to have to realize it's going to be painful for me. It may not induce any pain at all because they may decide not to live with it. But if I live with my boundary, it means I got to sacrifice something. And that took me a long while to understand. My tendency is to believe that if I talk enough or raise my eyebrow to the right or do whatever, I'm going to heal somebody. So I had to get away from that.
As a mother, there's things you do for your children that have to shift when you get into this situation. And, we always say in the group, there's no chapter, when they hand you the book on parenting, there's no chapter at the end that says, and, oh, by the way, if your child struggles with substance use disorder, disregard, chapters 2 through 5, because the rules kind of change. So what I had to do is I had to realize, okay, I can't protect him anymore. Okay. I have to treat him as an adult, and he has to, whatever decisions he makes, then those consequences have to come. I kept interfering because I did not want him to suffer, because when he suffered, I suffered, and I was saying, okay, he's not thinking straight, and the consequences that are going to stack up here pretty quickly are way more than what he's prepared for. So I've got to mitigate that. Well, all that did was keep me in the middle, in the enmeshment of the drama. And we finally figured out, okay, this is not a short-term problem. And it is affecting our relationship with each other and with our other children and with our friends and et cetera. We've got to start treating this like a marathon and not a sprint. And that means we've got to look at every situation that we're in and say, okay, what is the wise and peaceful and healthy decision to make right now? And we have to make it together, even though that means he's going to suffer more, because I'm no longer going to protect him and not let him fall. And that is, it is really hard because it is scary. It's not just that there's, maybe some consequences. We're talking about life and death things. Mm-hmm. So, we sit around and say, oh, let's be, tough love, let's be strong. But you're scared for the life of your child. Mm-hmm. and to actually withdraw and say, okay, I'm going to have to let go here means, okay, there's a possibility that he's not going to make it, and that is really tough. This is life and death.
Which goes back to what Melanie said earlier, that it's one thing to become aware of those and then make this. But then if we didn't have a support system in place, we couldn't have carried them out. When we had each other, we were fixing to be pulled apart. We started drawing together, but only because we did what other people said. Went to a support group, got a sponsor, had a therapist if we needed, a counselor, a pastor, somebody like Melanie, education, and over time, those things began to draw us back together. It didn't make the substance use disorder person in our life suddenly act right. They didn't. One of our sons was addicted for 17 years. We're celebrating 2.5 years of sobriety now. Life is so different, right? But think about that. That was almost 2 full decades that we've been dealing with this. And so nothing got better overnight, but for us to stay in that and to be healthy, not just survive, but somehow have some joy too, we had to do what other people said do.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where you kind of make that separation between enabling and helping. And so, you know, I think that word enabling, to some people, it's so hard to comprehend what is enabling, because it's always one of those things where it's like, well, maybe if I give this person this, they can, you know, this will help them on this side, and then it'll get them out of trouble, and it'll create less trouble for all of us in the long run. But then it becomes that tug of war where you're almost in the middle of the rope, and you're kind of grappling with that. And so I guess that's where I really want to kind of ask you guys, where do you set boundaries and how do you adhere to them? Because I think that's so important, because it's one thing to say you're going to do something, but it's a totally different thing saying that, you know, actually sticking to it and setting those boundaries. And Melanie, I'll start with you. You know, what are some, you know, tools and resources and topics or tips that you give to people in, you know, kind of making that list and saying, okay, these are my boundaries and this is why and how I'm going to stick to them.
Right. And it's good that you differentiate enabling and helping too. Enabling is not you sitting there saying, yes, I would like for you to continue to use or drink. That's not what's happening. Enabling is when you prevent the person with the addiction from facing consequences. And that's, like you said, Lauren, your own behaviors come in where you're trying to control the situation. And there are actual techniques that you can use, and this is why it's important to get plugged into therapy. There are practice or coping skills that you can practice that will help you maintain certain levels of boundaries, internal and external boundaries. Internal boundaries are, like you mentioned earlier, you had to kind of learn the subtle experience you were having and where to set that boundary within yourself. And basically what that means is you start to have these intense worries come up. You start to feel these urges or cravings, like I mentioned earlier, to do things to control the situation, and you back off of doing those things. So it's good to separate enabling and helping, and also good to separate the worry you feel from the behaviors you're engaging in. So instead of going through the phone, following someone to the building where they have AA or NA meetings to make sure that's where they're going, instead of doing those things, you need to turn to your own support group for help. And those are external boundaries. When you are basically setting this boundary, I'm not going to do this thing if it means that you are not going to face a consequence, because the consequence could actually be something that saves their life.
Absolutely. And Carrie, maybe you can speak to this too. You know, maybe early on when you guys were kind of going through this, I know Art, you said things were a little more subtle for you at the beginning when you were trying to kind of navigate that. For you, Carrie, what were some of those boundaries that you really started with to be able to kind of to adhere to, that really helped you kind of take that next step in helping your loved one while also helping yourself?
Okay, so, you know, I think one of the important things that a place I had to come to when we knew that this was the path that we needed to take, was I had to face the fact and acknowledge that I'm doing this because of the internal struggle of myself. So that helped me when I started to begin to practice healthy behaviors. I knew that it internally was it was driven from me. So that way, when I started feeling the reactions, it didn't surprise me. It didn't catch me off guard. Now, we were in a support group by this time, so I was talking and people were saying yes and encouraging me, and I had people around me, which was important. But one of the things as it progressed with our older son, and we realized that he was deep into addiction and was not ready for help, you know, one of the things we said was, actually Art said it, was, okay, we need to get out of the mat business, which means we tell him, hey, we are for you, we love you, we want to help you get help, but until you're ready to get help, we can't help you any other way, financially or getting you out of trouble. And having that conversation with him, although he was, didn't really hear it or receive it. So, but once we set that, then when the things started happening that we would normally have done, taken care of, he gets arrested or whatever, then it's like, okay, no, we said, we agreed. And basically what that agreement for me was, I'm tearing up right now, feeling it again, is I'm not going to do anything without talking to my husband. Okay. Because that was another thing that, Matt knew if he got me apart, if he separated me from his dad, then he could talk me into something. Okay. So my acknowledgement was, I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to agree to anything. I'm not taking any action that I don't talk with Art about, and that we don't agree together is the right thing to do. That was a big step for us.
And some of those times, even when we could get that far and say an appropriate no as a not enabling or a boundary, that there was still the moments after we hung up the phone or got out of their presence that we had to collapse in tears, or call our sponsors or call our whoever it was to get the encouragement and the strength to be ready to get to that. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed, as Melanie said, by the feedback loop. Yeah. Right. And so don't hear us say that we caught onto this quickly and did it really well early. We didn't. Yeah. We struggled for a long time. Yeah. And it really was her courageous move to say, I've got to submit myself to a group and do what they say, what the sponsor says, what the therapist says. And then we got on the same page together. And I really feel for folks that go through it, especially marriages where they don't have full support for it. It's really tough. It is hard. Very tough.
Yeah, because I think that there can be that separation, and too, I think the support system within your own family is extremely important. Your spouse, obviously, your other children that are also living this with you, the ones that are dealing with this, as a sibling that's got the substance use disorder, and so it certainly creates that dynamic, within the family. And I think, to your point, it's you sometimes take one step forward and then two steps backwards, and trying to get out of that cycle of where you feel like you've accomplished something. And it's hard because you want to be able to stand firm on that, but then the what ifs start to play into your thinking, and the constant fear of what could happen if I don't do this, and then it just starts to kind of eat away at you. So really, I think setting those boundaries is critical, but having that support system, like you said, the accountability partners. And I guess maybe Carrie and Art, you can kind of speak to this too, as a husband and wife team. And, maybe Melanie, you've got some input as well, but, sometimes when you're dealing with loved ones, the separation, how do you work on that relationship and align yourself on the same page? Because sometimes when somebody's experiencing something that might be a little different than someone else, or they maybe don't have family members that have gone through it, or a spouse, in your situation, it's Carrie, you've dealt with the children, or you've actually lived it yourself. So how do you bring the two of those together so that everyone's on the same playing field? And even when you have families that are divided, or maybe, divorced, or step parents that may, there tends to be that back and forth and that pulling of, well, it's not technically your kid. You can't simply, you certainly can't understand. So how do you deal with that dynamic?
Oh, wow. Great question.
That was a roundabout way to get to that question. And again, maybe you guys can speak to that, and Melanie as well. Well,
we have those dynamics because we were a blended family. And so we were both taking care of children that weren't our own, and those that were. So we have that dynamic in spades, actually. And part of what Carrie had to do as a stepmother to navigate is the thing that can happen with a stepmother is that there's a lot of subtle push against their authority, even when they've done a really good job of trying to love that child, right? And then you've got other mixes that come in from the side that may not be on the same page. So you definitely can't always change anybody in the equation. We've learned that. So like Melanie said earlier, our basic focus has to be where do we get our support? Who educates us? Who encourages us? Who prays with us? Who talks us off the ledge? Will we listen? And then will we be humble enough to follow what the advice is? And how do we draw other people into that and model that for other people? We could do it fairly well, and some people in the equation just are not going to go along. That's unfortunate, but that happens. So we have to bring our focus back to what can we control, right?
It's ourselves.
Yeah, and it's ourselves. The first two lines of the Serenity Prayer talk about, God, give me what is it that I can change, okay? And what is it that I can't change? And then the third line is, well, can you give me the wisdom to know the difference between the two? If I can tell the difference between the two, maybe I'll work on the area that I have some impact on and quit spending energy on the areas and the people that I don't have any impact on.
Okay, here's the funny answer to your question. We were going to a counseling center at the time that all of this went. And I mean, all of us and our whole family had been in that counseling center at one time or another. So we had been so much to that counseling center that when I would go and talk to the counselor and I would go to the desk to check out, the woman at the desk this is back in the day, had the credit card machine where she would tap in the credit card number. She knew our credit card number by heart. Okay.
Oh my God.
We were there a lot.
Yeah.
So we had to have a lot of help. I mean, and what I encourage other parents, when we're talking to them is, okay, let's treat this issue like we would if we had a fever. Okay. I mean, let's go get the help we need all along the way, because this is tough and nobody can do this alone. So we did a tremendous amount of counseling for us individually, for us together, and for the family members that, would go with us, because we needed it. We just absolutely had to have it.
Yeah, and I think that, there's kind of that boundary within that boundary, because you've got to set your own boundaries, and then you've got to set your sort of family boundaries. So Carrie and Art, you got to set a boundary within yourselves, and, trying to make that, that keep that synergy. And obviously that central focus can be so hard. And, I think the whole idea of getting help. So I was a freshman in college when my parents passed away, and I was just adamant, like, I'm going to do this on my own. I don't need anyone's help. And that was just sort of my mindset. And then basically it was almost mandated by my coaches at Rutgers. I was a gymnast at the time. Like, you're going to go get counseling. My grades were slipping. Everything was out of control. And it was like, you need to get this help. And so sometimes I think it's just a matter of surrendering, like, surrendering that control and just saying, hey, like, it's okay to get help. And I think so many people, there's such a stigma, take substance use out of it. There's such a stigma that surrounds mental health and our own being. So when you say, I'm going to see my therapist or counselor, Melanie, you sometimes become that person that nobody wants to talk about. Like, it becomes so difficult because people just immediately assume. And if I had one word of advice or encouragement, I don't care what you're going through in life. I said, I don't care if it's just a bad breakup or, just something silly. I think that everybody can benefit from seeing a, licensed counselor or therapist, because having that unbiased opinion, everyone's dealing with challenges in life. And I think that if you can stand tall to it and say, look, you know what, like, it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're empowering yourself to be a better version of you and equipping yourself to overcome things, even maybe before they start. So you're building a resilience. And I think that's one thing I would encourage everyone that's here on the call, and obviously that will be watching this later on, is that, there is no shame in that. There is no shame in asking for help and being, vocal in this, because I think we all have challenges in life, no matter what it is. And so that's something I would just encourage people. And, as we kind of move down the list here, Melanie, if you have anything else you want to add to that, kind of getting into the trust and communication aspect of that was a big factor and something that can be very hard in relationships. So how do you build that trust and build that communication with your loved ones as you're going through this?
Right. And I like what you said about just in general, everyone can benefit from going to therapy, even if it's one session. And I think it's unfortunate that stigma still exists, but one good thing that I'm seeing, at least in my own practice, especially with younger generations, is the idea of going to see a therapist, talking with a therapist. It is seen for what it is. It's a resource. It's not the end all be all by any means, but it is a helpful resource that anyone can benefit from. And it's because none of us are really taught early on how to deal with things like worry or just any kind of difficult emotion. We're not really taught to just sit in the feeling and allow it to pass. We're usually conditioned to act on it to get it to go away. I don't like this feeling. It's very unpleasant. I want it gone. And if you can kind of grasp this mindset that you can't get your feelings to go away, you can't get the worry to go away, you will never stop worrying about a family member or a loved one, but you can do things that help, you know, your own mental health and sanity during that process as it passes. And like you said, Lauren, trust and communication come up a lot just in general in family work with mental health. But it has to happen with when addiction is included, because trust will be broken. And that's the thing about trust, is it can be broken in an instant, but it takes a long time usually to rebuild that trust. And it takes an immense amount of work to rebuild it. And it takes everyone involved to do that work. So, you know, I always talk to my clients about rebuilding trust, and even outside the bounds of an addiction experience, rebuilding trust feels incredibly uneasy when you start that process. And you also kind of don't really have a guidebook for it. It's just a matter of allowing yourself to feel the uneasiness of, okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and trust you right now that, okay, you're 3 months in early recovery. I'm going to trust that you're going to this meeting. I'm not going to follow you halfway across town to make sure you're there. But what that feels like, and this is kind of an example to illustrate it that I use with a lot of clients, rebuilding trust is like you're blindfolded and you're standing on top of let's say a 2-foot tall fence. The person who's broken your trust is telling you, just step off. It's only a couple feet down. So you're sitting there on that fence. You're about to step off, hoping it's only a couple feet down, but you're terrified that it's 50 feet down and you're going to crash. So that's what it feels like the first several times, if not more, that you put yourself out there, that you trust that this person is doing what they're saying that they're doing. And most importantly, you're maintaining that internal boundary. You're keeping the worry where it is, because that's separate from the behavior. Worry or the feeling, and then the behavior. The boundary is right in the middle of that. Sitting in your worry, you're getting the support that you need, and you're not going over to these behaviors that help get the worry to go away for that short amount of time.
Interesting.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very useful. And Carrie and Art, maybe you can speak to that. Where did you start to build that trust and that relationship in communication in your process with your children?
I think first we had to do it together. We saw there were cracks in our own communication that preceded the substance use disorder. It just revealed them a little bit. That was tough, you know, but okay, so we got to face those. We got to get better at our own communication. We got to get better at communication with our helpers. And then slowly over time, and again, we're talking 12 years cycle with one son, 17 years with another. So there are two different stories there. And there's a lot of ups and downs in between. One of the things we learned early on, one of the best things someone like a Melanie taught us was what they call the 24-hour rule. And very simple. It was when your loved one seems like they're doing better and you're happy, and maybe they're home for a visit from rehab or whatever the situation is, and they ask you for something, you have a 24-hour rule before you say yes or no.
Wow.
And, yeah. And now it doesn't have to be hard and fast 24 hours. The whole point was you want to not just base your changes or your trust level based on what you're hearing, but what are you seeing? What are their actions over time? Okay.
And act and not react.
And act and not react. Because one of the things that we found about us, and most common, and I'm sure Melanie deals with it all, is that we can easily get caught up in the emotions, both the good and the bad, of another person's recovery. And just like they can do dramatic chaos to draw us into it when they're not doing good and suck us in. When we start seeing improvement or what we think is improvement, it's easy to go in the other direction and assume way too much too quickly because we want it to be true. And so just a simple thing like, okay, I've got this rule. I'm generally going to respond quickly with a yes or a no to your request. But no, I've got this 24-hour rule. And they look at you like, what? What is that? And so whatever your time frame is, part of it is removing the emotionality of it so you can trust your own decision and not just put trust in what you're seeing or hearing from someone. There's an old saying in recovery that time and a collection of all the data will really tell the tale, what's really going on. So it's a slow process to rebuild trust. Part of our problem or part of our challenge was, how much am I fooling myself? How much do I want to be fooled in that trust process?
So, I mean, once we, they told us about the 24-hour rule, I mean, we use that consistently, even when our children were still in active addiction. So when they would ask for something, they got to where they knew what our answer was going to be. Well, we're going to take a day and think about it, which they don't want to give us a day to think about it.
Right.
They could manipulate us, with the drama, with the story, with the need, I'm hungry or whatever. It's like, no, we need 24 hours so that we can be on the same page to answer and know that that's, but I use that all the time in every situation that affects me emotionally. If I've got to make a decision, it's like, I'm going to take 24 hours because it helps me, the emotion come down so that I can make a rational decision. And there's no reason not to take it, but talking about communication, really our son's addictions lasted so long that what we figured out, is that they were actually the ones that were going to be driving for the relationship restoration in the end. Basically, all that we could do was to let them know that we loved them and that had not changed, that we were for them, and that we very much wanted to have a healthy relationship with them. And we had to leave that door open. But they had to find sobriety, and they had a lot of healing to do before they were ready. And then they began to approach us, ever so slightly, about having conversations and opening that door back up. But, they were adults at that point. So we were like, okay, we just have to prepare the road and know that door is open when they're ready to reapproach.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the 24-hour rule. I think that is so strong and something we can use, as you said, in our everyday lives. But when you set those boundaries, I also think those boundaries are oftentimes not respected early on. But the more that you set them and adhere to them, the more that they become respected. And I think that is something, and again, this is in all facets of life, but I think that's something that can be so beneficial, because the more firm you are with those boundaries and the more you stick to them and don't kind of let them cave in, the more you strengthen those boundaries, you strengthen that relationship and build that trust. And I think it's all, kind of works together and sort of, pulls itself in the same direction so that you're really able to kind of be on the same page and not have this, again, tug of war.
Yeah.
Hey, I was thinking I'd like for Melanie to weigh in on her experience with loved ones, whether they're parents or spouses or siblings, in terms of some of these ideas of what are the toughest boundaries, not specifically because there's no one size fits all, but what do you see more commonly as the ones that are the hardest to keep, or why, other than these things we've talked about fear and that type of, what are the other things that are going on that make us more prone to not hold the boundary?
So you guys have actually touched on a few of them already. And in general, like you said, if you act through an emotional level, or especially an intense emotional, your boundary will not be held as easily. And a lot of people kind of back off the boundary in general. And Lauren, like you said, a lot of times you get poor responses to a boundary in the beginning. People don't respect them, don't want to respect them. But a thing to remember is, you know, that your boundary is working if you get a poor response from it. You're changing the dynamic.
Yeah.
If you get yelled at for something, chances are your boundary's working because you're introducing something new into the dynamic, and they have not adapted to it yet, but they will eventually. Lauren, like you said, you have to be consistent with it. Some of the really common issues that a lot of family members that I've talked to have run into deal with finances. That's probably the biggest one, I would say. So if you're used to giving, let's say your parent used to giving your child financial assistance, that's going to be a very difficult boundary to figure out, you know, first of all, what is the boundary that I need to set? That's why having a rule like the 24-hour rule is really helpful. It takes the responsibility away from you, and you can rely on these things that professionals tell you, hey, here's a rule that you might need to consider implementing. And then what's left over is you follow the rule. You don't have to change it. You don't have to figure out what it is. You just follow the rule, and you deal with the feelings that come with that. And then, of course, if you can be consistent and implement it over time, that's better. But finances are for sure going to be the top thing that I hear people talk about. Another thing too is just communication in general. So when you're communicating boundaries with your loved ones, it has to be as transparent as possible. So, you know, talking about this rule, not just saying, oh, well, let me think about it, I'll get back with you. Be direct with it. No, I'm actually following this 24-hour rule. Here's what's been recommended by my support system. This is what I'm doing. And you lay it out for people like that, even if it feels uncomfortable to do so. You want to allow the person in addiction to talk openly about their experiences as well. I think one of you guys, Carrie or Art, I'm not sure which one mentioned it early on. Some conversations are really, really difficult to have. And when you're in early recovery, you will experience things like cravings, like I mentioned earlier. And you have to, as the family member, you have to let that person discuss those things. Them discussing it takes the power away from the craving or the intense feeling that they're having. And it doesn't mean that they're going to go out and use again. It doesn't mean that. It means that they are identifying an issue that they have. And they are at least trusting you enough to vocalize that. And you guys, as family members or loved ones, you need to allow that to happen, as scary as it is. And that's a good boundary to hold. And it sounds like it's not really a boundary, but it is. So you're not stepping in and saying, no, we're not going to go there. We're not talking about that. I can't talk about that. You are holding a boundary to where, nope, we're all in this. We're all going to have transparent communication.
Good.
Love it.
That's great. I wanted to real quickly, because we're almost out of time. One of our attendees here wanted to know if we were still taking questions. Yes, if you guys have questions throughout the entire broadcast. They did ask the best way to start a parent group. So this is a great transition for you and Carrie and Art with your PAL group to give us a little more information and maybe just give us some insight into how you all started this and maybe some advice if someone wants to do the same.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things that we could talk about. Then I want Melanie to weigh in too, because she's had experience with groups. The one we currently facilitate is, as you said, is called a PAL group. The acronym is Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, but it's not just for parents. It's for anyone, a loved one that's concerned, whether it's a spouse, a sibling, significant other, whatever it is, are welcome as long as they're 18 or over and sober. And we meet weekly here in Birmingham. Right now we're doing by Zoom, of course, because of coronavirus, but they could go to palgroup.org, palgroup.org. There's a ton of information there about their lessons, their education, vision, mission, all of that's in there for free. If they're interested in that type of a group, because remember, there's different types of support. We gained a lot from Al-Anon. We recommend Al-Anon to people as well. Find an Al-Anon, go to their site, find an Al-Anon group. Those have helped many people. Melanie can weigh in on some others. We were involved for decades with Celebrate Recovery groups and still encourage people to look for those as well. And there's Smart Recovery, there's many others. PAL is just one version. PAL combines open share to discuss the feelings that Melanie's been talking about, all those different things, the dynamics we're going through, but it also has an educational component in that we have a focused lesson or speaker each week that does a lot of what we've been doing today on there. And it's one version of support. If somebody's thinking about starting one, if they'll just contact me or go through APC, we can get them connected. We can train them for free. PAL gives you every resource you need for free.
Yep.
All the lessons are free, all the backups for free.
Training.
All the training is free, and they are a national organization. It's just one example of a good group. Melanie, you may know of others.
So those types of groups are very helpful because they are discussion based, even though there is that educational component, which that's vital too. The discussions are really, really important because it normalizes what you're going through. And I mentioned earlier, I used to work at a treatment center. That was one of the best resources we offered for families on a weekly basis. It was a couple hour long meeting each week. People would just come in, talk about how their week has gone, talk about something that they've been struggling with. And each and every time you would have someone else who has gone through something so similar, if not almost the exact same, to where they can talk about what helped them. They can talk about the feelings that they had through the process. So those types of groups that include interactive discussions are very important. Another type of group, if you have a loved one that's currently in treatment, I don't really know of a treatment center that does not include family support in some way. So figure out whatever treatment center your loved one is at, figure out how you can become involved as a family member and go do everything that is available to you. One of the things I mentioned earlier was Family Day in the intensive outpatient group that I used to run. Most of those types of groups will offer some kind of family component. So that's where you as a family member or loved one can actually go and sit in on a treatment group process and see what your loved one is going through. So it gives you kind of a glimpse into their world and kind of the things that they're learning in terms of mental health and addiction, the educational components, what goes into addiction, a lot of the medical background discussed a lot of times in those groups. So having that type of group, it's usually counselor led, those are really helpful too. And like I said, I've not heard of a treatment center that doesn't offer some version of that. So get plugged in if you can.
That's great stuff. And Carrie and Art, can you say the website again where they can get connected with PAL?
Yeah, just www. I'm old fashioned. I always say www. But PAL Group is one word, PALGROUP.org. Very simple. Carrie's going to try to put it up for folks. It'll take you straight there. It'll tell you where meetings are currently, but it will talk to you about their vision and mission. You can look at their lessons. You can see if what you're thinking, your philosophy kind of lines up with what they want to do. And then you can apply to start a group. But if you want to do one anywhere around Birmingham or in Alabama, we'd be glad to help you. That's part of what we do, is help new groups get started. Before we close.
And where can they reach you, Art?
They can reach me at ART@THRIV as in Victory E, BHAM. So that's thrivebham.com, art@thrivebham.com.
That's BHAM?
Yeah, like the abbreviation for Birmingham. So it's Thrive.
Okay.
So I do recovery coaching, counseling, and then we help with group processes. And so they can reach me through that, and I'll be glad to talk to them about that. I wonder, do we have time for Melanie? She had a great idea about a quick technique for worry, since that seems to be pretty common with all of us. Can you set that up for her?
Yeah, let's we will make a little time here at the very end as we get ready to close things out. We were talking about that before the call. So we were talking about that worry technique earlier, and in the constant worry that we have. What is a technique that you can share with us that kind of can help us navigate that worry and come out on the other end in a more positive direction?
Yes, the anxiety reduction technique that came to mind, I think I mentioned this before the call too, it should take about a minute to explain, and I think that's about what we have left, so it's perfect. But this is applicable to anybody because everyone faces some kind of worry. So you identify what your worry is, and this is a daily activity that you do. It's 10 minutes a day, and that's important. It's 10 minutes, no more, no less. Most of the clients I've done this with will just set a timer on their phone. But during that 10 minutes, you sit ideally somewhere in a quiet place with no distractions and do nothing but worry about that thing or that person or that situation. What that does is it tells your brain, because our brains are built to protect us, and that's why we experience worry in the first place. It is signaling to us, hey, there's a threat in your environment. So this 10 minutes a day, every day, and that's where you have to be consistent with it, tells your brain, okay, I'm listening to you, you have my undivided attention, let's worry about this thing. You want to make sure that the worry is enhanced as much as possible during that 10 minutes. So I tell everyone that I work with this to write down as you kind of process things come to mind, put it on paper, have something in front of you, notepad, pen, write it out. And then let's say, for example, part of what you're worried about is a situation involving a specific person. One way to enhance that worry during the 10 minutes is maybe have a picture of them that you're looking at during. There are several different ways that you can enhance it, but you do want to make sure you are allowing yourself to feel that worry for 10 minutes. Then the timer goes off and you go about your day. What you do during the rest of the day, because the worry will come to mind, this is not just going to get it to go away. But what you do each time you have that worry come to mind is you tell yourself, you remind yourself, okay, now I'm going to think about this tomorrow from 2 o'clock to 2:10. And if you can do it around the same time each day, that's great. If not, as long as you can make yourself do it each and every day, do it consistently. Research shows that within about a week and a half to 2 weeks, you will notice that worry, whenever it does come to mind, it will be less intense and it will come to mind a little bit less frequently. So this stuff has some good research behind it. Like I said, super simple, 10 minutes a day, sit and worry. The challenge is going to be making yourself do it every day.
Very, very good advice. Never been told to worry about something, prompting to worry about something, but I love it. I think we've learned a lot of great stuff on this call today. I'm going to be implementing that 24-hour rule, let me tell you, because that's big time right there. That's big for me because I'm a knee-jerk person. It's like, answer, got to have it now, ready, go. So I love it. And again, we just appreciate all of you. Carrie and Art, remind people, PAL group tonight, correct? We got the PAL group going on tonight. What time is that, 6 o'clock?
6:30.
6:30, okay, got that, 6:30.
It's a Zoom. If anybody's interested and they don't know how to get on the Zoom, how do they do it? Email you?
They can email me, get on Facebook and, private messages, and we'll send the code. We'd love to have them. What we try to encourage people to do, somebody. If you're not in that situation, somebody it is, let them know it's available.
Awesome. Great stuff. Melanie, we appreciate your insight, obviously your expertise on this topic and covering so many bases today. Art, Carrie, thank you so much for opening up to us and sharing your personal journey as well. This is tremendous, and I hope that everyone that's listening and will hear this same call later on can take something from this and be able to apply this to their everyday lives. And again, we appreciate each and every one of you. Those on the call, everyone stay safe out there, and we hope to catch up with you guys soon.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye-bye.
Thanks.